We are in the Gospel of Matthew. We find ourselves in Matthew chapter 16 and verses 17 to 20. I am going to be reading from the Moffat translation of the New Testament. Always a problem with old books. The bindings go, the covers fall off. Matthew chapter 16, verse 17. Jesus answered him, "You are a blessed man, Simon Bar-Jonah, for it was my Father in heaven, not flesh and blood, that revealed this to you. Now I tell you, Peter is your name, and on this rock I will build my church. The powers of Hades shall not succeed against it. I will give you the keys of the realm of heaven. Whatever you prohibit on earth will be prohibited in heaven, and whatever you permit on earth will be permitted in heaven." Thus he forbid the disciples to tell anyone he was the Christ. From that time, verse 17 is crucial to grasp. In technical terms, God is transcendent. If you're to understand theism in a Christian tradition, you have to begin with the idea of the transcendence of God. The transcendence of God is the idea that separates Christian theism from pantheism and animism. God is separate and distinct from his creation. The created order cannot be manipulated to manipulate God. Since God is transcendent, that means in order for us to understand who and what God is, God has to reveal himself to us. The reality of his transcendence means that God, from our perspective, is not accessible unless God takes the first step to reveal himself. Notice that the Godhead works in concert, not individually. It is not three gods, but one God manifesting himself as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, three and yet one, the continuing unity of the Godhead. This is a key biblical passage in the ongoing debate between a Roman Catholic understanding of the faith and a Protestant view of the faith. In the Roman Catholic view, Peter and his successors are seen as stewards of the faith. Peter, in that sense, is the first of the line of popes that continue to this day. Now, I think there is an element of truth in the Catholic position, in the sense that Peter is a key early leader in the church. The big problem with the Catholic view of history is that Peter was not the leader of the church in Rome. In point of fact, we don't really know what Peter's relationship was to the church in Rome. There is reason to believe that he was there. There's reason to believe that he was killed there. But to speak of Peter as a first pope or as a first leader of the Church of Rome is highly anachronistic. The emergence in the second century, more than a century after Peter's death, of what could be called the nascent papacy is clear. But in the Roman Empire, when the church spread, there was not one church and one leader until well into the second century. So in the second century, or a generation or more after Peter's death, we have emerging in the church in the various towns and cities in the Roman Empire, sees, S-E-E-S, or a C singular, which have one man and one usually urban center, reflective of the Roman governance of the day. So not only was Peter not a pope, there was no actual successor of Peter for that position, because the position did not exist. The early church in Rome probably had a number of people of various types providing leadership. Peter clearly was an important leader in the early church. Now, The problem is we lack records of what he did. And again, we've made this point. Any of the post-New Testament, post-biblical records that emerge that tell a story of the apostles are basically about as valuable as a $3 bill. They simply are not credible. Most of these accounts are myths and legends that arise later. It is not that the book of Acts is inaccurate as much as we continue to stress that the book of Acts is not a comprehensive history of the early church. The first half of the book of Acts focuses on Peter, the second half on Paul, but don't take that as a definitive statement of what was going on in terms of the church. There was much, much more. Luke was highly selective, and he had to be to get it all to fit into that one book. The book of Acts tells a limited story how the gospel went out to the Jews, then the Samaritans, then the Gentiles, and then to the very center of the Roman Empire. And the center of the Roman Empire, of course, was the city of Rome in the first century. And the book of Acts, the story of Peter, is not told in the last half. Yes, Peter was a great leader in the early church, and he led ultimately through his example of faith. And this is where we circle back to this passage in Matthew. Understand that what made Peter a great leader in the early church was his confession and profession of faith. And this point can get lost. The history of the church is replete with leadership in the church that is not of God and not godly. And don't think because we are evangelicals that we are immune from this. We can have people arise in positions of leadership that are not there on the basis of their profession and confession of faith. True Christian leadership and true church leadership is when men and women have a vision of God, are captured by that vision of God, and go forth in that vision of God. The church can be run by people who become nothing more, nothing less than church bureaucrats. Peter sets the gold standard. It is by this confession of faith that we lead, direct, and guide the Christian church.